There are certain things, probably a lot of things, to be honest with you, that I will wonder whether or not my brain, because I'm the very first to admit, and it's not always the easiest way to live, that my brain sometimes works on the biggest challenge that I have. My biggest weakness is that there are certain things that I'm convinced that I'm correct on them, and I'm like, no, there's no way that people can see this other than like what I'm trying to say type thing. And I feel like I've gotten better about that, but I'll give you a couple of examples over the course of the show today. But one of them that when I think about it, I think I can't be the only one that feels this way. That's the best way to say it. Like, there are a lot of things where I think to myself, I can't be the only one that feels this way. And then I find out that, yes, in fact, I'm the only one that feels that way. And I'm like incredulous over it. But this is one of them. I understand and I appreciate and I love the fact that people love football. I remember when I was in the, I believe, first grade, and I was a diehard Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Diehard. Everything that I owned, I mean, literally every picture of me as a kid, I'm wearing head-to-toe Pittsburgh Steelers gear. I had a Pittsburgh Steelers trash can. I had a Pittsburgh Steelers lamp, the little helmet lamp. I had every set of the pajamas from Sears in 1978 of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I had the bed sheet, you name it. I had the hat, all of it. My entire wardrobe of my elementary school era, is as it related to sports, was either Indiana basketball or the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I recall vividly, and before anybody jumps my case about it, I'm old, and keep in mind, there was no NFL team in Indianapolis. You had essentially one of four teams that you rooted for if you were of my age range in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the late 70s through the mid-80s. You were a fan of primarily one of four teams. The Bears or Bengals, for the obvious reasons, or the Steelers or Cowboys, because you basically got 3 games per week, and more often than not, they featured either the Steelers or Cowboys. And then the local game, which would have been Bears or Bengals, when I'm using local in air quotes. But and my dad worked in the steel business, so I liked the Steelers. That's why I went with the Steelers, and I was a huge fan. But I remember, I believe it was in the first grade, would have been the fall, the late summer, early fall, the first Sunday of the football season. And I was super stoked and excited. And Palmer Eicher, who lived next door to me, came over to ask if I could, play capture the flag or whatever. And I remember sitting there glued to the television set and hearing Palmer at the front door, and my mom saying, "Oh, Palmer, Jake's been looking forward to this all summer long. The NFL is back." And so I think I probably invited Palmer in to watch the game as opposed to us going outside and whatever else, because I could not wait, because I'd waited so long. The NFL was back. So I totally understand. I totally appreciate. I totally respect the fact that Colts fans right now on the eve, it is the last day of summer for Colts players. It's the last day of the summer, because tomorrow they report. And then camp gets underway on Wednesday with practice from 10 until 11. On Thursday with practice from 10 until 11. That's the morning time. And then on Friday, 10 to 11:15. But where my brain is different, Eddie Garrison, is this. I get it. I understand. I understand that everybody in Colts Nation right now is me on that day that Palmer Eicher was there at the front door saying, "Look, I've been waiting all summer for this." My only thing, and I know that this makes me the old guy, my only thing is I love the summer. I love the sound of kids playing by the pool, and I love people going to the lake, and I love, late night like walks when it's 8 o'clock and it's still sunny out, and I love concerts, and I love everything about the summertime. I love, love, love summertime. My only hesitation with the Colts having training camp and reporting is the fact that this accelerates the fact that before you know it, you snap your fingers and it's like mid-November and gray and rainy and cold outside, and we're wondering whether or not Will Levis is going to be back to take on the Colts in the Tennessee Titans matchup. But no, he's not, because Will Levis is out for the year. That news came out earlier today. I realized that, and he has no chance of ever being the starter for the Tennessee Titans ever again, probably, unless somebody gets hurt. But I digress. So that's my only thing, is it feels to me like they are reporting earlier and earlier and earlier, like where before we know it, it's going to be like Indy 500 on Sunday, Pacers Game 5 on Monday, Colts reporting training camp on Tuesday. It feels like we're headed that direction. But nonetheless, we are on the eve of it. It does feel early to me, and I'm worried that that means that summer is now officially closed. But that is probably an example of where my brain works different than everybody else.
It's like the first day of school, Jake. You know, it's the day before the first day of school.
I did love the first day of school. Do you remember the first week of school? One of the things I loved about, and here's another thing that's weird about me, but I think this one I'm not as alone on. I can still smell exactly the smell of those block rubber erasers, freshly sharpened pencils, and Trapper Keeper folders. I can still smell the smell of the first week of school. And I can still feel and hear the sounds of the last week of school. When the windows were cracked, you could hear the custodians mowing the lawn off in the horizon of the elementary school, and the fans were oscillating, and you knew that it was springtime and summer was around the corner. I can still remember both of those things. I always loved the first week of school, because you still had a 4.0.
Oh, who doesn't?
Everything was good. It was great. You find out who's in your class, you know, what your schedule is going to be. All of that was great.
Didn't have much homework. It was syllabus week.
Yeah, syllabus week was a big deal, like in college, right? You go and you get your syllabus, and that's like the extent of it. But nonetheless, Colts now, a lot of storylines that we will talk about. Mike Chappell going to join us at 1 o'clock today, and we will discuss that. And a very interesting column at Colts.com, which I think is well-timed because, and yes, I certainly understand the fact that if it's on Colts.com, it's going to be written within that parameter. I get that, but it gives glimpse. This is Carly Ursay-Gordon's vision for the Colts is the article. And the guy that wrote it, J.J. Stankovitz, going to join us coming up at 2 o'clock today to kind of add some insight onto how things, because I think that is the big question mark. I think the biggest question mark that people have for the Indianapolis Colts in the 2025-2026 season is not, and I know that the big one in X's and O's is who's going to be the quarterback. I get that. Okay? And I get that is the Anthony Richardson experiment now continuing, or are we at the end of it? Have we moved on from that, or, you know, all of those things? I get that all comes into play. With all of that said, I think the biggest storyline, truthfully, for the Colts is how do things change now that Jim Irsay is no longer in the mix, obviously, now that he has passed. But does the vision, does the direction, does the standard operating procedure of the Colts change now with Carly Ursay-Gordon being the one where the buck stops at her desk? And she has been around. This is not like this is not a situation where, and I think you see this, like there are probably sports movies made about this kind of thing, where you have an owner that passes away and the trust fund kid that's been living on the Colorado ski slopes or the California beaches for 15 years now suddenly is the one making decisions, and they're totally out of touch. And you have the people working in the office that are looking at each other because they're like, what do we do now? That's not the case here. I mean, you're talking about somebody that has been on the sidelines wearing the headset. You know, a lot of people for the last 2 seasons have raised the question or made the wisecrack about Carly Ursay-Gordon on the sidelines wearing the headsets. But you look at it now, and aren't you glad she was? Aren't you now, as a Colts fan, saying to yourself, you know what? I thought that was weird that she was listening in on everything the last 2 years, but thank goodness she was. Because now she will be better prepared for this moment, and the moment is here. And I think it's going to be a very fascinating thing to watch. Over the weekend, fascinating thing to watch was that of the WNBA All-Star Game. Caitlin Clark obviously was there in the coaching standpoint, but not participating itself. Not a whole lot of huge moments from a basketball standpoint within the game, right, Eddie?
Not a whole lot, really. You had a couple records broken. Skylar Diggins set the assist record for an All-Star game, first player to ever record a triple-double in an All-Star game, and then Nafisa Collier set the record for most points scored in an All-Star game.
You know, Skylar Diggins, and this is how I know him well, it seems like just yesterday that she was in that same building winning a state title as a sophomore in high school, right? Time flies for sure. But it was cool to see that record for somebody who is, an Indiana player. I know that the big story was that of the T-shirts. Pay us what you owe us. This seems to be a very polarizing topic. And my thought would be this. The WNBA is getting ready to go into a collective bargaining agreement. They are in it right now, actually. They're in the midst of coming up with a new CBA. And salary caps and amount that could be spent and et cetera. And for the most part, people and fans and media don't want to hear the inner workings of the negotiations between players and owners within pro sports. They just don't. They don't. Now, I'm not saying it goes so far as like shut up and play, but I think that there is still the narrative from a lot of fans of, look, you're getting paid money to play a game that kids play for free. So be glad with what you have. Be grateful for what's there. Go out and pick up a sledgehammer and try doing a real job. But the thing that I think people need to remember is this. I think all of us, the one thing, professional sports is fascinating to me for the following reason. When you look at the American population and you have people list, okay, make a list for me of different professions that you at one point in your life dreamed of being. I think a lot of people would say doctor, maybe lawyer, and then ball player. The thing about professional sports is that is a livelihood, that is a profession, professional athlete, that probably the highest majority of average Americans can say that at some point in their life they aspired to be that. And I'm talking about maybe, it was when you're 8 years old. I think most people by the time they're 12 or 13, they're pretty realistic. Okay, so I'm not going to be Peyton Manning. But nonetheless, all of us can remember that time in our childhood where we envisioned being and had the dream of being like that level of athlete. And so with that, when we hear about athletes that are getting paid and that made it, there's a little bit of envy in all of us, is there not? There's a little bit of envy because when we look at a LeBron James or we look at a Aaron Rodgers or we look at a Shohei Ohtani and we see players that are at the top of the game within a sport that we loved playing as a kid, our initial thought is, if I was in that position, I would be doing this because I knew when I was a kid, gosh, that guy's living out my dream and yet taking it for granted by wanting more money. That guy's living my dream but taking it for granted by not wanting to play in every game. That guy's living my dream but taking it for granted by not showing up on time to camp. And if I was in that position, I'd be doing it for $300,000 happily, and I would be showing up every single day because I love the game. And I remember exactly I could not wait to go out for another practice. I get it, but you were also at Allisonville Little League, and you were 10. And so with any athlete, it's no different than any line of work. I think a lot of people that say that they're tired of these spoiled athletes holding out for more money are the same people that work for a union within a job that they have that has some sort of a union agreement about the number of days off that you're allowed to get for an illness or whatever it may be. And there are parallels between the only thing that separates the two is the salaries themselves. But the salaries are based upon supply and demand. And the reason why salaries are so astronomically high for football players and basketball players and baseball players is because there's only so many of them. And we resent the fact that we are not amongst that group that is within that supply. Then you throw the curveball in that with women's athletics, it is a relatively new thing. And there is some resentment about Title IX and what that's done for athletic departments and other such areas. And I get 100% the fact that people say with the WNBA and their players that they have not developed or built for themselves the credibility or benefit of the doubt or power to dictate what the payment should be for them, because it is a league that for the most part is operating within the red. And it is a league that for a long time, I don't believe this is still the case, but many of its franchises are being subsidized by the NBA. And so therefore, people look at it and go, that's laughable. What do you mean? What we owe you. What do you mean what they owe you? What they owe you, they're losing money. Pay us what you owe us. What, like, so in other words, pay you a bill of debt? An IOU? Because what they owe right now is the fact that they're still operating under a loss. But that's about to change. And I think what people need to realize is when you now see that the WNBA and their media partnerships are about to pay them $2.2 billion with a B, peanuts compared to what the NFL gets and the NBA, I get that. But it is still astronomically larger than the amount that was being brought in during the last collective bargaining agreement. Now, secondly, you can sit here and say that the WNBA players, it's laughable that they would ask for an increase in wage considering that the teams that they have are operating in the negative. Until you realize now that they are getting ready to go into an expansion. They've announced new teams that are joining the league, and those teams reportedly have had to pay a $250 million entry fee. So there's another $500 million right there. So now you're talking close to $3 billion that is coming into the WNBA. And if you are the players, you are saying, now all of a sudden supply and demand is starting to fall in our favor, because you can't tell me there's no demand if you're bringing in nearly $3 billion, and yet we are the limited supply because there are only so many players. So I do understand the players' standpoint, and I commend them for speaking up for themselves, but I also get, and I'm not trying to play both sides of it here, but I get why when you finally have perhaps the most marquee showcase of your sport, the last thing people, especially that are new to it, oh, here's a new sport that I'm not familiar with. I'd like to tune in and see what this is all about. I've heard about this Caitlin Clark. I've heard about this Angel Reese. I've heard about this Paige Beckers. I want to see what these women, how good they are. And you turn it on, boom, and the first thing you see thrown right in your face is collective bargaining agreement and grandstanding and trying to create leverage for one side versus the other. I totally get why that is a turnoff to a lot of people. And there is a time and place element that comes into all of it. Eddie, how was your weekend? Anything exciting?
Had Indiana Sports Talk on Friday and Saturday night, and that's about it. How about you, Jake?
I did, let's see. I went to a movie on Saturday night.
What movie?
I think it's called Eddington. It's with Joaquin Phoenix. It was totally bizarre. I actually kind of enjoyed it. I liked it was well done. It was well acted, but it got to a point where it was like super weird and kind of hard to follow. And I think it was one of those movies that at the end, there's like 45 seconds of silence as the credits are rolling, and then you can kind of faintly hear in the distance one guy like just go, huh. You know what I mean?
Oh, I forgot I went to the TBT game and watched Assembly Ball lose on Saturday.
How about Indiana and that? I mean, what in the world was that all about? They got smoked, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they got blown out of the gym, right?
By 3 of UIndy's finest.
But again, now Yogi Ferrell and James Blackman Jr., did they play? I thought.
No.
Yeah, they did not play, right?
No.
For what reason did they not play?
I don't know. It was
they
never
just
announced.
sold the tickets and then decided not to play?
It was never announced why
did
they
wear
didn't play.
shirts that said, pay us what you owe us?
So, at least Yogi was in the candy stripe pants and in the warm-up shirt they were wearing over their jerseys, and then Blackman was in just some regular basketball shorts and a T-shirt.
I mean, they got smoked. Now, Butler plays tonight, right?
Yes. 7:30.
Ohio State playing tonight as well, right?
Carmen's crew, yeah.
The other thing I did last night, you want to know what I did last night that was great fun? And this is one of those, I'm going to give credit where credit's due to people. So yesterday in the afternoon, my cousin sends me a text that says, hey, I think I might have an extra ticket tonight to the lawn at White River.
Did you go to Dirks Bentley?
That is a fabulous facility. I did not go to Dirks Bentley, although I did run into somebody who went to Dirks Bentley courtesy of tickets that they got from us, which was
nice.
I appreciate that they went.
So wait, did you go to the Sidney Colson comedy show?
Did not. Would you like to keep guessing? I will tell you this. It led to, I went to an event last night that yesterday in the afternoon, when I told Shannon what I was doing, it led to a series of very serious questions via text.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Now, was this a concert?
Yes.
Okay.
My cousin has, like, the season tickets or whatnot to Everwise at White River, right? The amphitheater there.
Okay.
And so he sent me a text yesterday that just said, hey, I think I have an extra ticket. Do you want to go? And I thought, you know what? I think I know one song. And I didn't know a lot about this band, but I said, okay. That sounds actually, because I've heard they're a fun band. So when I texted Shannon to say, hey, this is, I mean, obviously I talked to her yesterday, but when I sent her a text initially that just said, hey, so Doug reached out to me and has an extra ticket, and I think, or I didn't say that. I didn't say he has an extra ticket. I said, Doug reached out to me, and tonight I think we're going to go see this. And she was like, what? And then I'm like, no. The concert. Bare Naked Ladies. So when I said, I think Doug and I are going to go check out Bare Naked Ladies, she's like, excuse me?
I should have known that. We were giving away tickets
the band
last week on JMV.
They had Sugar Ray and Fastball open. Sugar Ray, Mark McGrath, give him credit. And Mark McGrath has he has a weird, when I was looking at him, his actions and his hair and everything else, for whatever reason, I kept thinking that he looked like a morph between Connor Daly and Ed Sorensen. But Mark McGrath and Sugar Ray, I love entertainers that get what it's all about, right? They don't take themselves too seriously. They're there to have fun. They know that people are there just to have fun, and they are great performers with that. And that's exactly what he was. And Sugar Ray, he did a really fun little montage of 90s stuff. Then with the Bare Naked Ladies, I had no idea Bare Naked Ladies are the level of talented musicians that they are. They played a number of different instruments, a number of different songs. They have fun with it. It's almost like a lighthearted, not comedy show, but kind of a lighthearted show wrapped into a music concert. It was very well done. It was very enjoyable. Had a good time last night with it.
Now, did you have the IndyCar race yesterday as well?
I did. So Toronto yesterday, but we were done with that in the very early afternoon. So that allowed me to then be able to, by 8 o'clock, be at the show for Bare Naked Ladies, which was great fun. We did lose, by the way, a member of the Indiana sports community over the weekend. That has been very significant over the last, 50 years at the very least. I'll let you know about that, and then we will actually bring on somebody who knew him very well. Pat Knight going to join us 1:30 today. 2 o'clock, J.J. Stankovich, as I mentioned, Mike Chappell at 1 o'clock. When we come back, the passing of a media icon in Indiana. And yes, I don't mean that to say esoterically amongst just simply our bubble, but rather somebody whose work you were probably very familiar. We'll get into that next, and we will also touch on the eve of Colts camp and training day report day for the Colts. We'll get into all of that when we come back. Query and Company here on a Monday. Good Monday afternoon to you on The Fan. Mike Chappell going to join us a little over 25 minutes from now. Colts camp getting underway this week. We will be out there, as a matter of fact, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This show will be out there. Over the weekend, the news coming out from the family of Bob Hamill that Bob Hamill passed away at the age of 88. And I think most of you are familiar with Bob Hamill in terms of his work, notably as the essentially biographer of Bob Knight. I mean, that's the easiest way to say it. Bob Hamill's job by definition is that he was the sports editor for the Bloomington Herald Times, known as the Bloomington Herald Telephone at the time that he took the job in 1966 as the sports editor. But his story is a relatively fascinating one because he grew up in Huntington, and in 1954, he got a job with the Huntington newspaper, and he had just finished his freshman year at Indiana. And instead of going back to Bloomington, because he had that opportunity, he went ahead and took it and began writing for the Huntington newspaper before moving to Bloomington and taking the job with the Herald Telephone in 1966. And in that capacity, obviously, and in that era, that would have been essentially covering the first coach that he would have covered in terms of totality of a coach's tenure at Indiana would have been Lou Watson before Bob Knight was hired in 1972. And yes, he covered the Rose Bowl. Yes, he covered Mark Spitz and the Olympic prowess that Spitz had as a swimmer from Indiana. But to cover Indiana sports for the time period that he did, even though Bob Hamill's job would have been, covering high school sports and the different great teams and games that came through Southern Indiana, if your job is primarily as the face of Bloomington sports media during the Bob Knight era, then the most important storyline that you would cover would be Bob Knight and Indiana basketball. And I don't mean that to dismiss or discredit any other topic in which Bob Hamill would have been assigned to cover, but rather because there is no one figure. And I totally understand that if you did not live in the state of Indiana during the time that he was at his apex, that you would have hesitation or roll your eyes at this statement. But during the time that Bob Knight was at his peak at Indiana, and I would say that would be from roughly 1973 to 1993, certainly, that 20-year period, there was no more polarizing figure in the state of Indiana than Bob Knight. And more so, and I truly believe this to be fact, during the 20 years that Bob Knight was at his peak influence in the state of Indiana, I believe that Bob Knight was the most powerful sports figure within the state of operation, more so than any ambassador or sports-related figure in any state in the country. I think Bob Knight had and wielded more power in Indiana for a 20-year period than any other sports figure you can think of for any state. Maybe Bear Bryant, maybe Joe Paterno, but Knight's influence was immeasurable and unprecedented at the time that he was here, and certainly his polarization. And what Bob Hamill had the challenge of navigating was the fact that if you are the sports editor and you are a writer that is assigned to the coverage of Indiana University athletics, and there are a long list of people in the sports media world that Bob Knight iced out and basically froze out from his program. Ed Sorensen would be one. Mark Patrick for a period would be one. I believe Don Hine for a period would be one. Where Bob Knight would not like a column that was written and just deny access or make things difficult or make it. And there was, It is very difficult. It's very, very difficult if you are a delicatessen that operates on a street with 5 other delicatessens, and you're the one that the cold cuts supplier decides he's not going to sell you ham. Well, that's pretty difficult then to compete with the rest of the delis. And that was what Bob Hamill had to contend with, was knowing that if he got on the wrong side or got frozen out from Bob Knight, that he was on the outs and that he did not have coverage and that he would not be the go-to person for coverage about Indiana athletics. And certainly, journalistically speaking, you could make the case that Bob Hamill overstepped the line of journalistic principle and integrity by getting too close to the subject or not being as objective as he should have been on the subject. And that would be a fair critique. Except for that maybe Bob Hamill was actually the one in the relationship of when people thought that Bob Knight was the one that was pulling all the strings. Maybe it was Bob Hamill because he knew how to perfectly work Bob Knight. But either way, he was a brilliant writer in terms of his ability to describe things as they happened, to use the language and prose to retroactively recreate situations that you were reading about. And he also had the ability, which was very difficult or would not have been an easy thing to do, to kind of serve as the intermediary between a lot of the press corps and Knight himself, because he was the one that if you really wanted to if you needed to get something from Knight or if you needed to get close to him, Hamill was a guy that had to do the balancing act between serving as that kind of pool reporter to an extent, but at the same time making sure that he was the one that was getting the inside scoop or the story that others were not. And I think he balanced all of those things very well while being a very nice man to a lot of people. He also served as the color analyst for Don Fisher on Indiana broadcasts in the mid to late 90s. So there were a number of things in which Bob Hamill was involved with Indiana basketball even after his writing and coverage. But he passed away over the weekend, did Bob Hamill, and he wrote books about Indiana basketball and Bob Knight in general. And I think for Indiana fans was a beloved figure within the history of that program. Bob Hamill passing away at the age of 88. Pat Knight, who I would assume probably thought of Bob Hamill almost as like an uncle-type figure, will join us at 1:30 to talk about exactly that. I mentioned earlier in the show that sometimes my brain, I come up with something that I'm convinced that I'm correct. Over the weekend, something happened to me from a sports standpoint. And yes, I'll be an old guy getting off the lawn here, or telling you to get off my lawn. I am convinced, and I think Eddie will agree with me. I'm going to be very, very, very curious whether or not Eddie agrees with me about something over the weekend that took place when Eddie asked what I did on Friday, where I had a sports opinion, and I will go absolutely to my grave and die on the hill of the fact that I'm not wrong about this. I'm not wrong about this, and I would challenge anybody, not literally, I guess, but to question me, which plenty of people did over the weekend. I'll tell you what it is next, and Chap joins us in 18. So on Friday evening, I believe it was Friday evening, I'm sitting and I'm watching some of the coverage of the WNBA All-Star Game, and I noticed that the four-letter ESPN, and I get why they do this. I mean, it creates conversation. Look, guilty as charged because I'm bringing it up in conversation. Now, Eddie, let me ask you, and I need you to be honest with me for the sake of the sanctity of this question I'm about to ask. I need you to be honest.
Okay.
Did you happen to see the tweet that I had on Friday evening in regards to something I had witnessed on ESPN and the conversation it generated?
No.
Okay, good. Then that leads me to authentically ask you this question. So as I'm watching on ESPN and they're doing WNBA coverage, I guess they're doing a segment this summer where they are going to different states and they are listing for each state the top 10 sports moments in the history of that state. And I'm watching it, and when I looked up, I happened to look up right as they were on number 2. And the number 2 moment that they listed was Keith Smart's shot to defeat Syracuse in the 1987 National Championship game, which if you were to talk about, and when you say, and I guess this is one of the qualifiers here, when you say greatest sports moment in a state, there are 3 ways to look at that. Number 1, something that just happened to take place within that state.
Yep.
Or number 2, something that took place in connection to that state that is the most nationally famous. Or number 3, something that is a sports moment or a moment that is most representative or most identifies with the culture and the people and the livelihood within that state itself. Those are kind of 3 different areas, right?
Okay.
Keith Smart's shot, for example, to beat Syracuse in the 87 National Championship game is one that certainly has, I mean, obviously it's been 38 years ago, and, you know, everybody but Indiana fans seem to be aware of how long ago that was. But it was a moment that still is referenced. I mean, if you watch the opening every, you know, dun 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 dun, they show the NCAA tournament, you see Smart shot. I mean, it was a, you know, it's a last second shot to win a national championship. Pretty significant, okay? But if I were to ask you, Eddie Garrison, off the top of your head, and do not look at my thing. If I were to ask you right now, what is the number one, if you were to stop, if we go to the Indiana State Fair and there are 1,000 people walking around and you stop people and you say, okay, 2 questions. Question number 1, are you from Indiana? If their answer is yes, they're from Indiana, and you then say to them, what is the top sports moment in the history of this state?
Marlins got it. We're going to the Super Bowl.
Okay, that's way up there. That's probably top 10, right?
Winning the Super Bowl, certainly.
That, I mean, it's hard to argue that would not be, from a national standpoint, I don't know what would be bigger than a team from your state winning the Super Bowl. I mean, globally that is known, right?
Any of the shots by Tyrese Halliburton in the playoffs?
Recency bias, but yes, one would assume that as we move forward,
right,
those are going to stand that test, right? For sure. I mean, the 8 points in 9 seconds is way up there, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's still reference. You go with all due respect, you and Caden, who's in here sitting in right now, I mean, neither one of you guys were even alive when 8 points in 9 seconds happened, but you know exactly what it is, right? I mean,
yep,
you see it referenced all the time.
Yep.
I personally believe, so my point is simply this. If you were to just stop random people and ask them, some would say, I think a lot would say Peyton Manning related things, right? The Colts winning the Super Bowl, the Colts winning the AFC title game that you discussed, the Spike Lee choke game. If they're an IU fan, they're going to reference maybe the Watt shot or Keith Smart shot or whatever it might be, okay?
Heck, even the Andrew Luck game against the Chiefs when they make that
the
miraculous
Superman
comeback.
Cape game, that's way up there, right? Now, those are all like, now, then you get into the nuance of the high school basketball aspect of things. Scott Skiles' hooked shot that went in to defeat Gary Roosevelt. Stacey Turan's shot from three-quarters court in the 1980, Indiana high school basketball tournament. It is my personal belief.
Gary Harris?
That any of those, I mean, they're, Gordon Hayward putting in a game winner, right?
Yeah.
My personal belief is that the number one sports moment in the history of Indiana is Milan beating Muncie Central that became what obviously Hoosiers is about. I mean, Bobby Plump's shot that beat Muncie Central. And when I said that, and people are like, well, that's just because you're old, you're saying that. I'm like, that happened 20 years before I was born. But it's been, You go anywhere in the world, and people know what Hoosiers is, the movie Hoosiers. I mean, it's become perhaps the most beloved sports movie of all time. The Pacers wore the Hickory uniforms for, like, well longer than they should have. But at any rate.
God, those were awful.
The number one moment. Do you want to guess what ESPN listed as the number one sports moment in the history of Indiana? And I'm like, this is the most off base. And when I said it, the fans of this respective team were like, you're a hater. You don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, no, I don't deny that it was a great moment. I don't deny that it was significant at the time that it happened. But you guys, I'm sitting in here, Eddie's in here, and then Caden, correct, is the name?
Yep.
So Caden is shadowing you today, who's become a new member of the team here.
Yep. That
is a student at University of Indianapolis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Okay.
Senior. Yep.
So you guys tell me whether or not some of the things that I just mentioned you are familiar with, right? You're familiar with Key Smart shot.
Yes.
You're familiar with, are you familiar with the Danny Sullivan spin to win?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with Milan beating Muncie Central?
Somewhat.
Which is what Hoosiers is based on.
Yes.
Bobby
That's
Plump.
why I'm
You're familiar,
somewhat.
like there's a bar in Broad Ripple called Plump/Shot
Yes.
for Bobby Plump, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with Oscar Robertson and Crispus Attucks? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, that also was 20 years before I was born.
Now, most of this I'm educated through you, so thank you.
No problem. So they had the number one moment. And again, I'm going to go back to, if you stopped, because I go, look, that was a great moment. There's no question. I would not list it as a top 50 moment in the history of Indiana sports. And what I mean by that is if you were to stop people in the state of Indiana and say, what is your number one sports moment? What do you think is and some people, I don't mean to you. I mean the one that you think is the greatest moment as it identifies with the culture of who we are as the state of Indiana. And it is my belief that if you stopped people at the Indiana State Fair and asked them that, and you were not allowed to leave until you got this as someone's impulsive, instinctive first answer, you're going to be there a long time. They listed the number one as Notre Dame beating Miami in 1988 in the Catholics versus Convicts game. Thoughts?
Okay. I have no thoughts.
I mean, how you
I'm not
tell
even
me.
familiar with the game.
What's that?
I'm not even familiar with that game.
Caden, are you? No, sir. Okay. That was my point. I'm like, people were like, no, that's a huge moment. I'm like, in the moment it was, no question. I remember it like it was yesterday. And to Notre Dame fans, but for Notre Dame fans, to me, Notre Dame in 1973 ending Bill Walton and UCLA's winning streak was more significant in the history of Notre Dame athletics, even though Notre Dame's a football school, than the Catholics versus Convicts game, to me. And Notre Dame has had great teams and great moments, and that was a huge one, no question. But to list that as the number one moment in Indiana sports history, I'm like, what? I just think if you were to ask people if you were to stop random Hoosiers and ask them what is the number one moment in the history of this state, then you get into a whole different category of, do we count Michael Jordan's return game? Do we count John Daly winning the PGA when nobody had heard of him and that introduced him as one of golf's biggest charismatic characters at Crooked Stick? Do we count Grant Hill dropping from the Teflon in the 91 Final Four, or for that matter, the allegations of point shaving or the assumption of it with UNLV and Duke in 91? I mean, there are a gabillion ways that you can look at that whole aspect of it in terms of Final Fours and events that have taken place here. Do we count Eli Manning and the Giants winning a second Super Bowl and having it take place in Indianapolis? You know, you get into a whole different talk show at that point. But the one thing that the hill that I will die on is in no way, shape, or form, and no disrespect to Notre Dame fans, and I know what football means to Notre Dame, and I know what that game means to the people of Notre Dame and the fans of Notre Dame. And I was there, or, here when it happened, and it was a massive, massive story and a great moment and everything else. The 93 game when they beat Florida State, many Notre Dame fans might tell you was even bigger than the 88 game. But nonetheless, I will die on the hill that was not the number one sports moment in Indiana. Mike Chappell joins us next. This is Eddie's way of telling me that when it comes to me getting worked up over something of which I'm convinced that I'm not wrong, just to let it be, right? Let it go.
Yeah, I'm not going to play Frozen, Let It Go. So, yeah, we're going to go with the Beatles instead because it kills two birds with one stone.
That is correct.
Mike Chappell's favorite group, right?
Because Mike Chappell joining us on the program, of course, from WXIN, Fox 59, and CBS 4 on this, the eve of report day for the Colts, and then everything getting underway. 10 o'clock in the morning, practice number 1. We will get into all of that in just a minute. But, Mike, before we do that, I wanted to, I guess, sidebar in this area. I talked about him earlier, but as somebody who is yourself, a giant within the print broadcast world of sports media in Indiana, the passing of Bob Hamill at the age of 88 over the weekend, his family making that announcement. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to share kind of your recollection or just your thoughts on the passing of Bob Hamill.
Yeah, normally with the media, we sort of stay in our own little circles. Here I am in Indy, and he was in Bloomington, and was he a friend? No. Acquaintance? Yes. But the admiration is undeniable. And the thing that people have to understand about a Bob Hamill type person is he's covering the beat in his city, IU basketball. And not only that, he's got to deal with Bob Knight. And if you think that's easy, you're crazy. I did it from the periphery with when I was 10 years at Anderson, and we had what we always call it the Madison Heights Philbuck pipeline to IU. Bobby Wilkerson and Ray Tolbert, who I ran into the other day, was great. But Winston Morgan, Stu Robinson. So I dealt with Bob just kind of in passing. How you doing, Bob? How you doing? But nothing, even remotely close. But people have to understand how hard it is to maintain your reputation of objectivity when you're covering the beat in your community. And you have to be fair, objective, and you have to deal with stuff you write, maybe PO on the king, Bob Knight. So I thought he did a tremendous job, and I never would have wanted to be in his shoes to have to do what he did, because there had to be times that he had to sort of just kind of bow his head and say, whatever. But the footprint. Well, I always say, we all want to leave some kind of footprints just so the people remember that you were there. Well, Bob Hamill left footprints. Let me tell you, he helped so many people, the Rick Boziches and people like that I've dealt with as well. And David Hall, I just think it's incredible. And we knew he was not in the greatest of health, but kind of just makes me think how old I'm getting when people that I grew up with and around are no longer with us.
Do you, when you look at it, Chap, and you look at Bob Hamill's career, and he came to Bloomington in 1966, which means that he got there 6 years before Bob Knight, but Bob Knight certainly, he went to the Final Four in 73, so he was off and running in terms of his influence, right. Speaking of Bob Knight's, and having to balance and delicately balance exactly what you're talking about in terms of objectivity, but at the same time access. I mean, truth be told.
Sure.
Did Bob Hamill at any point, to your recollection, almost also serve not just as the immediate window to Bob Knight's world, but also kind of an intermediary between Bob Knight and the rest of the media? In other words, did he almost by just proximity become the guy that had to kind of serve as the middleman in the rifts that Knight would have with the rest of the media world?
Probably, and that's what I say, the balancing act is I can only imagine so tremendous, because you can't just come out and rip the guy. I mean, you just totally rip him, because you need access the next day, the next week, the next month. So it's very difficult to keep your credibility while calling a spade when it comes to the many things that Knight did, good and bad, and there were plenty of both. So I think it's really hard. I can't imagine. I dealt with Jim Irsay for 40 some years, and he respected the fact that if he did something stupid, I'd call him on it. We didn't always agree. I just think that when that theirs was about that level because again in Bloomington it was IU basketball, and oh by the way they played football, yeah, they sort of got you to the basketball season. So I wouldn't have wanted that job seriously. During my time at the Star, we went through 3 or 4 guys that dealt with IU as a beat, and everybody had horror stories of being yelled at or sent out of the locker room or whatever. And again, when I'm covering them at Anderson with our guys that were there, you're not one of the guys like the Bloomington guys and even the Indy guys, but I saw how hard it could be to deal with Bob Knight, how he just simply talked down to people and dismissed people. And I think he was hard on Bob Hamill at times because that's who Bob Knight was. So a legend, and what he did was help so many people, and he dealt with a very, very difficult situation, probably about as well as you could. Did things maybe go totally unreported? I don't know, but I thought he handled it about as well as you could, understanding that while yes I've got this job as the beat guy and the guy always there, you had to keep in mind you always had to be able to be there. So a difficult balancing act, and I thought he did it about as well as anybody could have and would do.
By the way, Chap, before we get to the Colts, and I know that you and I have crossed this bridge before, but sometimes it's worth doing again because it's fun, and that is when you really think about, like right now, if you just stop and close your eyes and you think about one of those games, of Stu Robinson going up against, a young Troy Lewis, or
right.
Madison Heights going to battle at the Wigwam against Anderson, or Highland coming in and taking on Madison Heights, or whatever it might be. The packed nature of the gym, the frenzy, the level of play that was there, the rivalry amongst all of it, and the town essentially shutting down on a Friday or Saturday night for high school basketball. In the moment that those things were taking place in the late 70s, early 80s, I don't know that any of us realized that what we were seeing is something that at some point 2 old guys on the radio would be talking about them as the glory years. But it truly was a magical time that I don't know that it ever comes back, right?
Yeah, and again, like I mentioned Ray Talbot, my grandkids participated in a basketball camp at Mount Vernon Middle School last week, Luke, Levi, and Annie. And Ray Talbot was one of the counselors, one of the main guys. And I made it a point to go over there and spent 10, 15 minutes. And we just talked. His eyes lit up. We go back. He's a friend. He's a guy that through the years, you just say, yeah, if I see somebody walking in the mall like him, we'd stop and talk, probably have lunch. But he was the most dominant high school player I ever covered. Not the best. Troy Lewis was damn near the best. He was good.
He was really good,
but
yeah.
I still there were moments, and I can still remember a game his senior year, and they're playing Elwood, and Elwood's got Evie Cotton name sticks in my head, and they said we're not going to be, in all Ray Talbot. We're going to take it in the lane. He blocked 18 shots, 18 shots,
Yeah.
And so but that was him, Mr. Basketball that year, one of the more talented Indian All-Star teams with Talbert and Drake Morris and Steve Risley and Rick Lance and on. And it was totally blown up because Drake Morris thought he should have been and probably should have been Mr. Basketball. And it just went to hell when you don't have chemistry. But I still say there were years in Madison County that I would have taken our Madison County All-Star team and given Indian All-Stars a hell of a game. I believe that to this day with all the talent. And yeah, I know I harp on that, but one of the things I've got is on my key ring, I've got a 1981 it's a memorable thing, one of those little keychain things. In 1981 IU championship, and it was Ray. It was Ray and Isaiah Thomas and Lana Turner. I was there for the Bobby Wilkerson, both of them at the Spectrum in Philly. So those were the glory days in Anderson, and for a while for IU. I mean, really the unbeaten team and all that stuff. So I never grow tired. You know, football is what I do, and it's what I've come to be. But boy, my 10 years at Anderson, glory days of 9,000 the Wigwam and 4,000 or 5,000 at Highland and Madison Heights, and what great times! Just great times.
By the way, 76 and 87, the bookends of Bob Knight's titles. I always found it fascinating that in both national championship games, player number 20 suffered an injury early in the game that knocked him out of the game and left him scoreless for the rest of the game. Bobby Wilkerson in 76, Ricky Callaway in 87. My brain is really weird, and I have no idea how that even pops into it. But
and again, I talked to our bosses to sending me to each national championship in 76 and 81. And I get there and to Philly, the Spectrum, and things are buzz against Michigan, and Bobby gets blown up, gets knocked out, literally knocked out. I don't know, 5 minutes in the game.
Yep.
Wayman Britt's elbow. So it was really pretty amazing. And I think in the semifinals, Wilkerson had like 20 rebounds against UCLA. So again, I just think I know people saying, yeah, move on. No, that's doggone. Those were great times with the Kent Bensons, and I'm still PO'd that Bobby Wilkerson didn't make the Olympic team. I really am, because he deserved it. But I'll never forget those times. And my son told me, he said, I didn't know you missed high school basketball that much. I said, well, back then it was special for 10 years, and it just, some of that memories just never. Mark Barnheiser, we're saying all this stuff with Brooks Barnheiser. I covered Mark Barnheiser when he would drop 30 every night for Lapel. So it was just a great time.
Chap, let's get to Mike Chappell, our guest, by the way, CBS 4 and WXIN Fox 59. Okay, Chap, obviously Anderson did serve at one time as the home for Colts camp. It is now at Grand Park in Westfield. Things get underway in terms of reporting tomorrow, practice on Wednesday. One of the things that I'm most curious about, we're going to talk plenty about the quarterback and other such situations over the course of camp, but I really am curious to see how, if in any way, things feel, look, or seem different now without Jim Irsay. And I listen, in terms of fan engagement, kind-hearted, connection, enthusiasm, all of those things for Jim Irsay will be missed without question as a man. But just in terms of the operative standpoint of things and the way that things go, do you think this year we will see differences?
No. Well, I don't think we're going to have that sit down with Harley like we did with Jim every, whatever it was, a fifth or sixth day of training camp when he comes out in his golf cart. We talk for 20 minutes and he answers 3 questions, because that's 20 minutes with Jim. I don't think we're going to have that. I just don't think, barring this thing going downhill real quick, I'm talking 1-6. I just don't see any way there's any changes people will notice. I just don't. Things are in place, and Carly and the daughters, the sisters, will allow it to play out, barring, like I said, a catastrophe to start the season. Now, after the season, we'll see. But the changes that could have been made or whatever, that time has passed. So I really don't think we're going to see much. I just don't know that Carly's going to be every 2 months or whatever, 3 months, getting together with the media. I just don't know that that's going to be part of her operations. I really don't. So beyond that, I just don't. Yeah, and again, she's not going to be there throwing mini footballs with $100 bills wrapped around them. That's where this time of year was so cool with Jim, because he understood more than anybody the importance of fan interaction during this time. He knew that during the season, it's hard for people to spend $400, $500, $600 to go to a game. But maybe it costs you $5 or $10 to go to Westfield, and the players are accessible. He understood that, and not that Carly doesn't. I think this will be the operations moving forward. But he enjoyed going out there and signing autographs and waving to the fans and throwing $100 bills, and we'll miss that. But I just don't think, maybe I'm way wrong and I'm missing something, but I just don't know that there's an occasion to where Carly can put her fingerprints on the franchise in a public way. I just don't see it unless it comes time for a move because things aren't working out, and I don't foresee that.
You know what's interesting, Chap? And I made this reference earlier. We kind of, and fans, media, whatever, and I'm not going to say people made fun of it, but you certainly saw people that kind of would raise the question of, why is Jim Irsay's daughter walking around with a headset on? Why is she carrying a clipboard on the headset? What's going on there? And people kind of rolled their eyes at it. But now that she is the one in charge, aren't you glad that was taking place? Because this is not, I think that there is a stereotype amongst billionaire families where the matriarch or the patriarch of the family passes, and then suddenly the kids take over. And in the movies or in the Netflix shows, when that happens, they airdrop some trust fund kid off of the ski slopes in Aspen and now suddenly take over the company and the family business. And there has to be some relief of knowing that there is a level of competence and understanding of the behind-the-scenes stuff because she's been preparing herself for this moment. And I think now we can look back on those things that people might have rolled their eyes at and say, I'm glad it went that way. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yes, all three have in their own lanes that they're at. But with her, she's really done exactly what her dad did. You know, remember how he started off? He did everything as a gopher early on. He learned, and that's how you do it. You learn. I don't think she's picked up jocks like Jim did. I hope she's not. But that's the way you know. Reggie Wayne told us how if she's in meetings, she's taking notes. He said you better be ready to answer questions if she's got them. So, and it wasn't being meddling. It was learning and demanding that you learn. So everything that she done, I don't know that the local media rolled our eyes, but we noticed her. You know, you notice her on game day. She's out there during practice when we're out there. She's out there, and she's paying attention. And like on game day, she doesn't. I think her headset's one way. I don't think she's sending messages to the coaches. But I do believe, like on a Sunday or a Monday, whenever they talk, she would say, maybe, why did you do this? What were you thinking? And that's what they should, and not to be critical, but to say, you know, understand. So she's done what her dad did as far as learning as much as possible. Now, there will be moves in the future where we scratch our head and say, why did you do that? It won't be because she doesn't know what the hell she's doing. It won't be. Because she's prepared herself as much as possible for every aspect of the job she has, whether that's going to be reinforcing the GM, the head coach, player acquisition. I don't know that she'll be. Well, no, she'll have as much input as Jim did because that's her job now. To certainly, I don't think to tell Chris Ballard, hey, let's go get this guy. But when he comes and says, hey, we're really interested in this guy, that guy, then she'll know who the hell it is. And then she can offer some intelligent input on why they should, why they shouldn't, what's the price going to be. So everything you said, I agree with. And she and her daughter or sisters are as prepared as possible for this transition because it's been going on for a while, for a decade at least, and at a higher level over the past couple of years when Jim's not been in the greatest of health.
Chap, let me ask you this as we head into camp and in conclusion here. Mike Chappell, our guest on the wildly popular and always busy and available again to be sponsored guest line. Chap, when you watch training camp, and you've seen a lot of them, I want you to kind of speak to Colts fans that might be going out and watching practice. And it is great that people have the access to go out and watch practice. But when you look at position battles or players that either camp is allowing them the opportunity to rise up and cement a position on the team, or camp is all of a sudden they fell short and it cost them a position on the team. What are you looking for? What tells you, as the trained eye that has been through 40 plus of these, what little things, body language wise, whatever it might be, can you see on a field that tells you that a guy is having a good or a bad camp, aside from simply the guy next to him just ran faster than he did?
Well, and as much as we think we know, keep in mind that A.D. Mitchell had a great training camp, and then not so much in the regular season. But where I really like to pay attention is, and yes, we're going to be charting completions and incompletions by the quarterbacks because, but if the fans get a chance, go down in the middle of the two fields when they have the offensive line and defensive lines going against each other. And this will be the first chance, because in the off season, you're not hitting, you're not, really going 100, full speed. But go down and watch the pass rushers. Go down and watch a blitzing linebacker take on a running back. That's where you really see. That's when we're going to see the offensive line. What have you got? Defensive line. Samson Ebukam. Where's he at on his return? And Leatu Latu. Is he going to make that big jump? That's where you really see the spirited things. Offensive line, defensive line. Yes, receivers and DBs. Yes, running backs. It's really hard. You're going to see Jonathan Taylor, run through a tackle and go 50 yards, and the fans go crazy. And the linebacker says, "I had him right here. We just can't tackle these guys." The area that's most enjoyable are pass rushers, interior and on the edge, going against the offensive line. Those are the two bedrocks of a team, and it's really going to be cool to see how well the edge guys are coming along, and how well the offensive line, with losing Kelly and Will Fries, adapts. This is the first chance to see the linemen really go at it. That's where you really see the sparks fly, really.
The players will report tomorrow. Practice gets underway Wednesday at 10. Mike Chappell has been ready for it since 1984. So everything getting underway out at Colts camp.
Them. You just keep stacking them.
Listen, I got you a gift, and I'll give it to you on Wednesday, Chap. How's that?
I hear that until I see it. I'll take your word.
All right. Well, we'll present it to you on Wednesday if I see you out there, Chap. But we look forward to seeing you. All right.
One thing, just for factual, rookies start reporting today. Rookies today. Everybody tomorrow, and first practice on Wednesday. So, first access for fans is Wednesday.
Wednesday, 10 o'clock. Practice gets underway. First ball is snapped. Appreciate it, Chap. We'll talk to you soon.
We'll be there.
All right.
Thanks.
Mike Chappell, CBS 4 and WXIN, Fox 59, where you can see and hear all of his coverage when it comes to the Colts camp taking place. A lot going on the sports calendar. We mentioned that Bob Hamill passed away. Pat Knight going to join us just a couple of minutes from now to give his reflections and recollections on Bob Hamill and his relationship with Pat's father, Bob. Also, keep in mind that this is the week of the Brickyard 400. You've been hearing us talk a lot about it, and when you think about that, I watched yesterday the end of the race in Dover and saw Denny Hamlin winning in that race in double overtime, and started thinking about the fact that, that race had a rain delay, and then you come back and you've got to finish strong as Denny Hamlin did. That's his fourth win now so far in the year. I'm looking at Kyle Larson, a guy that we know what the Indianapolis Motor Speedway means to him. And then I think about great drivers that have led the Brickyard 400 and had it get away from them. Dale Earnhardt Jr., for that matter, a race where I remember one year where he was leading and then his engine goes away and suddenly victory does as well. And I thought about the fact that when it comes to practice, it comes to qualifying, and it comes to auto racing in general, whether we're talking about Cup or you're talking about IndyCar with Pato O'Ward getting the win over the weekend, those drivers, those teams all want to make sure that their engine is running exactly as it needs to. So much work goes into engine replacements and checking it and wind tunnel testing and telemetry and all of that. And it would be crazy to think that any driver would go into a race weekend without knowing every single finite aspect of the engine, the car, and just how it's going to perform. And if you're going out to the race itself, you know that, you appreciate that, and it's part of what captivates us towards racing is watching and making sure that everything is so fine-tuned exactly where it needs to be. So why would you not treat the most important engine within you as the same? Which is why I think it's so important to get that $49 heart scan from Franciscan Health, and you hear me talking about it. Just $49, non-invasive. It is very simple. You can pay out of pocket. Franciscan Health will do the heart scan to let you know exactly your heart score and where things stand in terms of the calcium buildup within your heart, and you get a heart health risk assessment with that to give you the roadmap to make sure that you are going on about your life and your business, making sure that, in fact, every single piston is firing exactly as it needs to be and that your engine is running for the race of each and every day. It is so important to do. Franciscan Health is the place to do it. Just $49. $49 for a heart scan from Franciscan Health. Franciscan Health Heart Center offers the $49 heart scan to keep you running at the maximum performance. You can always Google Franciscan Health Heart Scan to find out more. Halfway through the program here on a Monday. Jake Query, Eddie Garrison here as well, joining us now on the program. He is the head basketball coach of the Marion Knights, and as we have been talking about in a few occasions today, reflecting upon the life and career of Bob Hamill, I figured that Pat Knight would be able to share his thoughts on it because, and Pat, you tell me if I'm wrong in this. I don't know what your relationship was with Bob Hamill growing up, but I know what Bob Hamill meant to your father and that working relationship that became a friendship between the two of them. And my initial thought was, I wonder if Pat almost saw Bob as like an uncle type figure. But thanks for joining us, and just wanted to give you the chance to kind of expand upon what relationship you might have had with Bob Hamill.
Well, you know, the one thing you always got to remember, your dad's friends are not necessarily your friends.
Right.
And especially when you got a famous dad, I mean, you find out quick, you know, you don't hear from guys, man, you know, that bothered you, always calling you because they couldn't get a hold of your dad. But, you know, Mr. Hamill, though, was like one of my dad's true friends. You know, my dad always had a saying, and I'll clean it up, forget them all but six. And it has to do with really your six best friends are going to be your pallbearers. And Mr. Hamill would have been one of those, you know, he was one of those type guys with my dad. And, you know, my relationship, you know, he was always great to me. You know, his son sat my brother and I, his son Rick, who's a doctor, babysat us when we were kids. He worked my dad's camps. He actually took me to Star Wars. I had to sit on Rick's lap to see Star Wars when it was at the Von Lee Theater in Bloomington in like 1977. And so, you know, I've known the Hamills, you know, my whole life. And but then, you know, I didn't see him for a long time. Then when we brought Coach back to live in Bloomington, you know, 4 or 5 years before he passed, it was great to see Mr. Hamill again because he was always coming in and every week having dinner with my dad and checking up on him. But from my standpoint, just I don't know if my dad had a better friend, you know, just because, you know, Mr. Hamill could kind of tell my dad stuff that other people would be scared to tell him. But just their love for sports. I mean, you talk about two guys, I mean, they could sit down and talk about baseball, football, basketball. I mean, it didn't matter. Most of the time, they didn't even talk about Indiana basketball. I mean, it's usually, you know, my dad was a huge Yankees fan. Mr. Hamill was a Chicago White Sox fan. I mean, even towards the end, even with my dad's Alzheimer's, he'd remember that. He'd always wear his Yankees cap when Mr. Hamill would come visit. And so it was just a great friend of my dad's and helped my dad a lot, you know, just through his whole life, just being one of those guys my dad could talk to. He would never take anything personal. Just kind of knew how to handle my dad's temperament.
What do you think it was, Pat, that allowed, you know, I mean, your father in particular, you know, so Bob Hamill arrived in Bloomington in 1966. He grew up in Huntington, wrote for the Huntington newspaper, and then came to the Bloomington Herald Telephone, now the Herald Times. What do you think it was that allowed your dad, I guess, to trust him and let him in? Because, you know, while I did not know your father well, obviously I think everybody knows that he didn't let a lot of people in that inner circle. What do you think was the source of the mutual respect between the two?
Well, you know, talking to Mr. Hamill, especially these last few years, you know, when he'd come and check on my dad, we talked about it. So, you know, Mr. Hamill's brother was a really good high school coach. And when my dad got the job, his brother actually, like, called him up and said, hey, this guy's going to be great for Indiana. You know, look what he's done at West Point. We're finally going to play defense. Well, Mr. Hamill wrote a scathing article how my dad was going to be awful to Indiana. No one was going to like the defense, the low-scoring games. And so they actually ended up at the same gas station, pumping gas for their cars. And, of course, Mr. Hamill's like, I look over there, and there's your dad. And I'm like, oh, boy. And so, of course, my dad gave him, you know, a little heck. But Mr. Hamill kind of apologized and just said, hey, that was just my feelings, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, Mr. Hamill said he was just up front with him, you know. And my dad was just like, hey, you know what, why don't we do a real interview? I'll come pick you up and bring, you know, bring you by the office and let's just sit down. So Mr. Hamill thinks it was just being honest, even though he wrote a scathing article. He just told him the reasons why he wrote it, what his feelings were, but, he'd like to know why my dad thinks his style would work. And so I think, talking to Mr. Hamill, it's just his honesty. And, it won a lot of favoritism. I mean, there's other stories, like in 77, he wrote an article, guys were transferring, they didn't finish, had a down year after going undefeated in 76. And my dad called him like, hey, I thought we were friends. And, Mr. Hamill was like, we are, but I have a job to do. So I think my dad always appreciated that, if you were honest with him and upfront and didn't sugarcoat things. And I think that's what got their relationship off to a great start.
Pat, I had once heard, Pat Knight, our guest, the head basketball coach at Marion, I had once heard that when Woody Hayes was fired from Ohio State for punching Charlie Bauman after the Gator Bowl, with Clemson, that it was your dad, Bob Knight, that called Woody Hayes and said, look, you've got to back down from this. Like, you've got to apologize to the kid. You've got to make amends here. And and I don't know if that story is embellished or if that was accurate, that it was Bob Knight that called Woody Hayes. But either way, I'm curious, do you think there were ever occasions where your dad may have crossed the line or erred and Bob Hamill was the one that spoke to him? Well, but I'm saying, we know that there were times he crossed the line or erred, but were there times where Bob Hamill was the one that maybe was the one that had the ability to say, Bob, you've got to walk this back?
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. That's why I was talking about, like, the six pallbearers. He was one of those guys, and he could take it, He'd gotten kicked out of the office, the locker room, but, knew he was going to get a phone call later, if coach was wrong, and apologize. But he was one of those few guys that could kind of, you may want to think about this, and that story is true about Coach Hayes, by the way. Yeah, Mr. Hamill is always one of those guys that, when the crap would hit the fan, with coach, it wouldn't even have to be on the basketball court, just, if he was upset with somebody or did something. Yeah, Mr. Hamill's always one of those guys that, could kind of tell him in a good way, knew how to approach it. But then he knew that, the messenger could get killed at times. But it never bothered him, never held a grudge or anything, because he knew deep down that, my dad loved him. And, eventually it may take a couple days, but if my dad was wrong, he would either stop by or call him up. But that was the great thing about that relationship, to have a guy like that, and not one of your assistants, not, an athletic director. Mr. Hamill was a writer and just a guy kind of on the outside looking in. And so I think my dad could even trust him even more from that standpoint, because, he didn't work for the university, wasn't on his staff. And so Mr. Hamill wasn't a yes man. And so, yeah, I think that's a good question, and you hit it right on the nose. Yeah, Mr. Hamill is one of those few people, that could really, have those conversations with my dad.
I'm curious, by the way, and I did not know, Pat, maybe I should have known this. I did not know that your father, Bob Knight, was a big Yankees fan. I would have assumed a Cardinals fan because of his relationship with La Russa, or even a Red Sox fan because of his admiration for Ted Williams. But when you were growing up, one thing I don't recall you mentioning much was baseball itself. Did you have a baseball team growing up?
Yeah, so my dad, the Reds were our team growing up. I was bat boy for the Reds. We'd go down to Tampa Bay, stay at the Reds Hotel. We were really close to Sparky Anderson, the big red machine. I was only like 5, 6 years old, but I used Pete Rose gave me his glove, my brother and I, his glove down at spring training, and I actually used Pete Rose's glove for my whole baseball career. Everyone thought I was full of it because it had 14 on the thumb and Rose across the knuckles. Everyone thought I took a Sharpie and did that, but it's actually Pete Rose's real glove. And so the Reds were our team. And then, of course, my dad, the Cardinals, we went over there all the time, and La Russa was there. But for him, though, as a kid, it was always the Yankees through his whole life. And then, he got to have a great relationship with George Steinbrenner. And so his mom was a big Cleveland Indians fan, being there in Ohio. But my dad, for some reason, it was probably because they were so good, grew up just loving all the Yankees. But when it came to us growing up, that was the time you got to know Sparky Anderson. So we were around the Reds a lot when I was growing up. So that was my team. But my dad always had that love for the Yankees, though. And so it's funny, he and Hamill, even my dad towards the end with the Alzheimer's, we could get him going when it came to the Yankees and the White Sox. And Coach would put that hat on when he knew Mr. Hamill was coming over. And but that was one of the ways, if he was having one of those bad days where he wasn't talking a lot, we could always get him going with something when it came to baseball.
And then what about from an NFL standpoint? I mean, you and I grew up in an era where there was no NFL team for the better part of our childhood. Did you have an NFL team growing up?
The Bengals. Yep. Cincinnati was, because it's close by. I actually I was telling my wife, because we got tickets to go see the Bengals Lions in October. And I grew up, I actually my dad got me a Bengals helmet as a little kid for Christmas. So it was the Bengals and the Reds when I was growing up.
I would have thought he would have been, your dad, a Browns fan, just growing up in the proximity to Cleveland and how big the Browns were, especially in that era. He
was, but for some reason, when we got to Bloomington, everything was the Reds and the Bengals. But, he has great stories of, meeting Coach Brown and Havlicek. No one knows this. Havlicek was going to play for the Browns because Red Auerbach was so cheap with his contracts. My dad actually went down to training camp when Havlicek was trying out for the Browns and actually convinced him to sign the contract with the Celtics. But it's kind of funny. I don't know what happened with my dad kind of leaving Ohio, kind of left the Cleveland teams behind, and growing up is always the Cincinnati teams.
Pat, you should have a radio show. You should just do 3 hours of story time with Pat Knight. I'll take vacation. You come in here and just do it for 3 hours.
Maybe if I have a job where where I don't have to be careful.
Well, here's the other thing, and I'm impressed by this, and this is a sign of your maturation, which is impressive. I don't know, 15, 18 minutes here, and this time no swearing, which is impressive,
I know,
right?
I told you. I promised you.
I mean, practice makes perfect, right?
But I got a great Hamill story that, honest to God, so you've seen Coach's outtakes, the golf outtakes on YouTube.
Yeah, of course.
So we were talking, and this is just, it was a few months before, Coach passed, and we were talking about the golf outtakes, and I was telling him my stories about, clubs in the lakes, up in the trees. And so that day when Coach picked him up to do their first real interview, they stopped off at the IU course. And they got out of the car, and Mr. Hamill was like, what are we doing? And my dad's like, hey, just walk with me. So they went to this one hole, and my dad went in the woods, started climbing up a tree. Mr. Hamill's like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I threw my putter up here the other day and it got stuck in the tree. My dad climbed up the tree, and Mr. Hamill said right when he got up to the limb, the girls' golf team started coming through. And so my dad was so embarrassed, he didn't want the girls' golf team to see the brand new basketball coach up in the tree looking for his putter. Mr. Hamill said he clung to that tree while 4 foursomes of girls went through. And Mr. Hamill said he just acted like he was going for a morning walk, And he said, no, I mean, I'd never even heard that story before. And he said my dad clung to life, didn't say a word, and 4 foursomes of girls went through and never knew that the new basketball coach was up in a tree getting his putter.
If you had to guess, was that the only time he ever had to go up in a tree and get his putter?
Oh, no, but as he got older, he'd send my brother or I to Pet Smile Lake, the woods, the ponds. I mean, and not just a club. I mean, there were times where the whole bag went into the water.
I do remember, and I'm not just making this up for the sake of a radio show. The one thing I remember when it comes to golf is during the time that we were in college together, you one day said you were going to go golfing with your dad. It was in the off season, and you were back home 45 minutes later, and we're like, I thought you were golfing today, and you said, yeah, my dad had a rough second hole, and that was the end of it. That we did not play 18.
You got to ask Brian Evans. We went to Portugal to play. This is when we're at Tech. We take these trips. We go to Ireland and Scotland to play golf with a big group of guys. Brian Evans was on the trip, and so the last day we got to play with Coach, and I mean, he first hole shanks a shot and he takes his iron, and it's like he's cutting down a tree, his golf bag with his iron. Well, we get to the next hole. He pulls his driver out. Half the driver comes out. He had broken all his clubs by hammering it. So he had to borrow Brian Evans and mine's clubs for the next 17 holes because he totally cut all his clubs in half from one bad shot on the first hole.
Yeah, it seemed as though the temper was fairly famous. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah,
the temper
but
was
see,
fairly
I think that's another thing that what he and Mr. Hamill relationship was so good. You know, Mr. Hamill wasn't an outdoorsman, so he didn't go fishing with Coach. He didn't go golfing. I mean, their time spent together was just, two guys hanging out, telling stories and talking about sports. And so I think that even helped their relationship more that, Mr. Hamill didn't have to play golf with them or tennis or go fishing with them.
Marion basketball will be in season before we know it. Pat Knight, the head coach. And, Pat, I certainly appreciate the time today. Great stories as always, and your reflection on Bob Hamill as well. And look forward to having you back on to talk about everything you got going on with the Knights basketball program, which will be here before we know it.
I appreciate it, guys. Have a good one.
All right, appreciate it. Pat Knight joining us on the program. We'll take a break. We'll talk a little bit more about Colts camp as well. J.J. Stankovic is going to join us talking about the article that he has up for the Colts. This is Carly Ursay-Gordon's vision for the Colts. We will get into that coming up in just under 10. Appreciate the time from Pat Knight, and I think it's interesting that he called him Mr. Hamill. I think that's the ultimate sign of respect to Bob Hamill. That's kind of the relationship that you have with your friends' parents, admittedly, that you still call them sometimes Mr. and Mrs. But really good perspective, really good stories. Went a little long on it, so we'll take a quick recess. We'll come right back and get right into Colts training camp. Rookies reporting today, veterans tomorrow. Camp getting underway on Wednesday. Colts rookies report today. Veterans tomorrow. Practice getting underway. The first one at Grand Park, 10 o'clock on Wednesday. That holds true for Thursday as well. 10 until 11 o'clock in the morning practice. Then Friday from 10 until 11:15 at Grand Park. J.J. Stankovich of Colts.com has a column up after a long discussion, interview, I guess, a glimpse into Carly Ursay-Gordon and exactly what Carly Ursay-Gordon now, with the unfortunate passing of her father, but now becoming, even though all three of Jim Irsay's daughters will in title be listed as the directors or the top brass for the Colts organization, Carly Ursay-Gordon is ultimately the one of the three, I think, where the buck stops. But as the owner and CEO by title, Carly Ursay-Gordon with the article, "This is Carly Ursay-Gordon's vision for the Colts." JJ wrote it, joins us now. JJ, let's begin with this. When you were preparing this particular story, and I want to be, clear here to offer for you, I guess, this is a situation where you're writing an article about and illuminating the storyline of the person who is your boss, when it all comes down to it, so that there has to be a delicate balance there. But what did you learn when you were undergoing the process of just kind of letting Colts fans know exactly the vision of leadership at this point?
What I learned was the amount of time and thought and energy that Carly has put into this, taking over ownership in tandem with her sisters for her dad. It really is immense. And, even in a, 2-hour conversation I had with her, I probably didn't get the whole scope of everything that she has done to prepare for this. And the thing that I wanted to come through in the article, Jake, was, I've talked with Carly before, and all my conversations with her are very interesting. I really enjoy them. I think she's a very thoughtful person. What I wanted to come through in the article was just she has put a tremendous amount of work into this moment. And, I think, the question I've been getting from a lot of people is, how's it going to be with, the daughters taking over for their dad? And what I've told them and what I wanted to get through in this article was, it's not like, their dad passed away and no one had any involvement in the organization, or they were sort of nominally involved and, they were here, but they weren't really doing a whole lot. It's like, no, they've been involved and they have really applied themselves into certain areas of the organization, and Carly applying herself to learn as much about football as possible, which really is in the vein of what her dad did, where, Jim, he when the team moved from Baltimore to Indianapolis, his dad said, "Okay, you're the GM now. Ernie Accorsi resigned. You're the GM." And he was in that role for 10 years, and he learned a lot about football through that role. And I think Carly, over the last probably 12, 13, 14, 15 years, has had kind of a similar education in the sport. And what I think that allows her to do is to operate an NFL franchise with certain guardrails that come from her knowledge of football, which I think is a big positive for an organization to have that in ownership, to again, kind of set those guardrails and lay the tracks and the vision for what the organization is going to feel like without meddling or, criticizing, I guess, unfairly certain aspects of it, if that makes sense.
JJ, one of the things that, this is a reality, okay? I mean, I'm not going to be naive to realities, okay? There probably is a reality. I don't think amongst all, and I certainly don't think it's probably to the number that it was, say, 30 years ago. But the reality is that there are those that are going to say, a female owner in sport, I mean, that alone is obviously somewhat unique. But a female owner within the NFL, and then on top of that, one that inherited the ownership just through familial tie as opposed to, having a business empire elsewhere. Those are two things that, albeit unfairly, are going to be assumptions or stereotypes that are placed thereof from the outside. Do you think that she is aware of that or even, you know what I mean, gets caught up in that noise?
I think, sitting here as a man, I would have to just guess that you can't not be aware of it as a woman in football circles, right? But she has done a very intentional job of, belonging in those environments. And I mean, look, to kind of your larger point about, it is, I would assume most ownership groups and most principal owners are men, but a team right now in the NFL that is viewed as a model franchise and how they've built things is the Detroit Lions, whose principal owner, Sheila Ford Hamp, is a woman who inherited the team. So I don't think that is at all I think some people might be biased, but there is a direct example 5 hours to the north of us of how a woman-run franchise can operate incredibly well and incredibly successfully. So, and that's not to say anything else about the Lions or, what the Colts situation, but look, I mean, Carly knows a lot about football. She knows a lot about leadership. She knows a lot about people. And those three things lend themselves very well to the direction the franchise, an NFL franchise, can take under ownership, whether that owner is a man or a woman.
Do you get the impression, JJ Stankovic is our guest, Colts.com. We're talking about, and we'll shift into just a second from now, the fact that the Colts training camp is getting underway, but Carly Ursay-Gordon, that is the lead story right now on the website. And in talking to her or her sisters, any of the three of them, and I don't know this answer, clearly they grew up around football, but did they grow up as big football fans, or is it something that, it was just more the business aspect that was of interest to them?
No, I mean, they are all very knowledgeable about football, and the history of this organization means a great deal to them. One of the things that didn't make the article was, Carly was talking about Dwight Freeney's Hall of Fame. It was his Hall of Fame induction weekend and the kind of, party they had there. And something she mentioned was, I wish you could just bottle up the vibe in that room and, kind of present it, because she was like, no one in that room was talking about, how shiny the trophy they all won was. They were all talking about what it took to get there. And, look, another part of it was, I think it was the Super Bowl year where, Mr. Irsay was very intentional about involving his daughters within team events, within team things, when, back then, I think Carly would have been in her early 20s. Casey would have been maybe late teens. Kaylin would have been a teen. I don't, know off the top of my head on that, but, they're all very involved, and I think they all very much took after their dad in terms of not just being, involved in the business side, but if our family business is football, we also really like football. And I think you couldn't spend 5 minutes talking to Carly without understanding she loves football. She is a football junkie. She can get as deep in the weeds as anyone when it comes to talking ball. And, that is really cool. She's a very curious person when it comes to the sport. And because of that, she has learned a lot and really, really enjoys the intricacies of the game. And, the conversation she's had with, coaches who have been in this building about how do you coach that cover two versus, an inverted cover two and certain, deep in the weeds details. Like, she has that because she wants to learn, and she definitely loves the sport.
One of the things I thought was interesting, JJ, in your column is the quote, and I'm not sure when and where exactly she had said it, but when talking about Anthony Richardson, maybe it was to you specifically, but the quote where she basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, there is still time for him to learn everything that goes into being a starting quarterback in the NFL. Is there a little bit of like a desired motivation or push that comes with that quote?
No, that I included that quote because it came at the end of the section about, her kind of talking about process and how, as an owner, you have to have a very broad horizon to, look at things. And, as part of that, she did say, that we still have time with Anthony, but competition is key. And, nothing brings out the best in someone like having a sense of urgency. And I included that actually after she was talking about, Grover Stewart and Nick Cross and their developmental, curves. And I just think it was important because what she said in the article is exactly how the Colts have operated this offseason. It's not like they have thrown Anthony Richardson into the number 3 spot or even the number 2 spot right now in the quarterback depth chart. It's been, we're bringing in Daniel Jones to compete. We still believe in Anthony. We think Daniel Jones has something he can bring to this team. And at no point has Shane Steichen or Chris Ballard said we've given up on Anthony Richardson. And Carly Ursay-Gordon buttressed that by saying there's still time. Everything that Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen has said this offseason has been aligned with what she said in the article. So I wanted to put it in there because I thought it was important for fans to hear what she had to say about that situation. But it also came in the larger context of having a process and, towing that fine line between being patient but not being too patient, or, being reactionary but not being overreactionary, when it comes to issues within your organization. So, but again, Jake, it really was aligned with everything else that we have heard from the coach and the GM of this football team this offseason.
JJ, do we know, one of the favorite things, JJ Stankovic is our guest from Colts.com. Colts, again, rookies reporting today, veterans tomorrow, and then practice gets underway Wednesday, 10 o'clock in the morning from 10 until 11. That same schedule Thursday and Friday. Friday goes until 11:15. One of the things I think that fans most enjoyed about training camp was, in fact, the Jim Irsay access. The fact that he was out there, he would, fans could talk to him. Also, the fact that he would answer a lot of questions to the media, at some point during camp and just kind of give almost like a State of the Union type thing. Do we anticipate that continues?
I don't know that. That's, probably above my pay grade here. But, I do know, like, the press conference that Carly Ursay-Gordon, Casey Foyt, and Kalen Jackson had back in June, they answered plenty of questions. I thought they all were, very impressive in that press conference. I don't know what it will look like, and that's kind of about all I can answer you on that one, Jake.
JJ, in terms of the, camp itself, the biggest storyline to you of intrigue, not including the quarterback position, would be what?
Okay, thank you, because I was like, if you ask me the biggest storyline, you know what it is.
Of course.
For me, I'm really interested in how this defense comes together. If you look at what Lou Anarumo had in Cincinnati when those defenses were good back in 2021 and 2022, it was a lot of veterans in the back end of that defense. You look at Von Bell and Jesse Bates at safety, Chidobe Awuzie at cornerback. And I think what this Colts defense has in the back end are a lot of veterans and a lot of guys who I think fit the way Lou Anarumo wants to play defense. And that's not just Charvarius Ward and Cam Bynum, who came in this offseason in very obviously targeted moves, but, Kenny Moore has inside-outside flexibility. Nick Cross really came on last year in a really impressive way. I think there's some really interesting stuff that Lou Anarumo can do with those guys in the back end. And then do we see more blitzes? Lou Anarumo is a guy who isn't, we're not talking about Brian Flores here or, Wink Martindale, but a guy who is going to blitz more than Gus Bradley did. And how do those blitzes look? How does the personnel up front look with being in more dime situations where you've got 6 DBs on the field? I just think there's a lot that I really can't wait to unbox with that defense in camp, because I do think they have a chance to be pretty good. Now, you've got to probably get the pass rush to take a step forward. I think that kind of starts with Laiatu Latu taking a step forward. But defensively, man, there's going to be some really interesting things that I can't wait to kind of track over the course of a couple weeks up at Grant Park.
And again, everything getting underway Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. I assume, JJ, once again, all of the family fun events and the kid events and everything else that is accessible just to the outside of the camper as you walk in is all back there once again, right?
It's back there, and I got to tell you, you can find my kids at Blue's Trick Shot Zone, where they will be attempting to. Blue's coming up with like a new trick shot every day. You know those like videos that like Blue and like Dude Perfect do. You can find my kids there, and you might even find me there if I need a little break from the heat or something. I'll pop over there and try to do a trick shot. Which, by the way, when Blue had that set up at our media day, I did hit the trick shot he had, the little ping pong ball bounce, in only 3 tries.
You know, the only weird thing about that is your kids are 26 and 22, right?
No, they are 5 years old. So,
Fair enough.
But as a 36-year-old, I would happily spend some time there.
Let's go, right? Yeah, why not, right? All right, everything getting underway Wednesday. We will be out there doing the show Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Again, Colts.com, where you can read not just that story, but all the coverage as it relates to Colts camp. JJ, appreciate it as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jake. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. JJ Stankovic joining us from Colts.com. I think it's going to be interesting, all of it in all aspects that we talked about. And I mentioned earlier, and I know that this is probably just a part of, just life in general and stuff flying around. But it feels to me, Eddie, you tell me if you agree or disagree. It feels to me like summers go faster and faster and faster.
Well, certainly it helps when the Pacers are playing until June.
Well, that's true. That's a really good point.
And then you have the WNBA All-Star game here, so.
I'm looking forward to the State Fair. That gets underway at the start of August, right? So we got, 2 weeks before the State Fair?
Yep, and I believe you'll be out there at the Dairy
Correct.
Bar, and then you'll be out there for at least one time. I know you're out the other day, but we'll be down there for the
Governor's Cup.
Yep.
For the State Fair and the Indiana Harness race that takes place. And I know that the fair, it kind of feels like the official ending of summer. It's weird to think now that the fair takes place so much longer after kids go back to school. I mean, I have a friend that teaches in Warren Township. They start today. Today.
It's unreal, man. It is unreal.
But again, that's you get the year-round school, and they have different in terms of the breaks and spring break and all that. They do go longer in those terms. But how often do you go to the State Fair, Eddie? Do you go each year?
Yes. Do
you have State Fair traditions?
Not really. We try to go on Tuesdays.
Now, I think it was last year we went one day, and it was during one of the free days or $2 days or whatever.
Yep.
I could not believe the traffic. It was unbelievable trying to get in there. But my tradition every year, you got to go to the Dairy Bar, you got to get a grilled cheese sandwich, got to get a milkshake, right?
Yeah, we linked up last year at the State Fair.
That's right. We ran into you were hanging out in the beer tent, right?
No, you were in the beer tent. I was at
Is
the
that
Dairy
what it
Bar.
was?
Yeah.
I just remember we saw you at the beer tent. We always go in. So we get the grilled cheese, we get a milkshake. Then we go in and we get, now that you can do it, we get one of the craft beers from Indiana. And then we just walk the loop. You walk the loop. You got to get usually got to get an ear of corn while you walk the loop. Just walk around. And I don't really do the rides, but I do watch. What's that one ride? I think it's called the Alpine something that I mention every year. And it's kind of it's a kind of a circular ride, but it goes up and down. It goes around, but there's a hill to it. There's an elevation change, and it always plays hard rock music. And people go on that and try to look cool, and they're flying all over the place. And we watch that and absolutely guffaw at people. It is the greatest people watching thing ever. We do that every year. Walk around. I usually try to go through some of the different barns with people's artwork and sculptures and things like that on display.
The arts barn, yeah.
Yeah, because I figure, you know what? I mean, it's cool to see people's hard work that's on display and people that were awarded for different things. That certainly merits it.
Do you like going to the swine barn?
I do, but then here's the thing.
Oh, no. It messes up your aura or your aroma.
Well, you get that, right? There is a great tradition of seeing the world's largest boar laying on his side and then watching little parents have to explain to the little kids exactly what's going on with the Nerf football smuggling. But as I've gotten older, I kind of like pigs. I think pigs are cool. They're smart. I think for the most part, they're pretty friendly. They know what's going on.
My cousin is a pet pig.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. And yet, then I go to the state fair and I realize that's the one place you don't want to be the grand champion because it ain't good, right?
That's a lot of bacon.
So I do feel bad when I walk through because I usually reach down and kind of give them a little pet. And then I realize.
Do you use your pet voice?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Hello, buddy. Hello. Yeah, and then I realize the fate, and it kind of makes me sad. I'm not going to lie to you. Now, when you go and you pet sit and you sit in and watch Boo, do you use a feline, like a pet voice for Boo?
Yes, I do.
Do you really?
Yeah, I have a pet voice. I have 3 animals.
So let me hear. Like, I want to hear
I'm
right now.
not doing it on the radio.
No, why not? I mean, I just did it.
Because you're you. I am me. I don't want to do my pet voice over the radio.
Do you call him just Boo?
Boo, Booskers.
I do call him Booskers, yeah.
Little buddy.
Yeah. Does he respond to it? Meow. That's not bad. That's not a bad meow, actually. Yeah, he meows a lot. He's a very vocal cat.
I know he's like you, chatty.
That's right. Yeah, we just sit around and listen. By the time I come on the air and I do a radio show, this is the second installment. I've done 3 hours of rehearsal with Boo.
That's right.
Boo is very up to speed on the things that irk me.
How much did you have to explain to him how football, baseball, basketball, all the sports work? Or was he
was a natural.
Got it.
He's a natural. Cats actually, if cats watch like baseball games, I swear, I mean, had
softball too, tennis.
They like their eyes. They are seemingly able to follow what goes on a screen. No question about that. No question about it. There was something that took place here in terms of basketball in Indiana over the weekend that away from the court, I think, caught people's eye and ear. And I kind of understand where athletes are coming from on this. We'll explain next. Just saw this. I think this just came out within the last hour or so. But this is sad news. According to now multiple reports, Malcolm Jamal Warner, who played Theo Cosby on The Cosby Show, and if you are of my age range, you absolutely, Theo Cosby was, man, I mean, there were so many great moments on that show, but the one where I think the moment that I think of the most with Theo Cosby, there were two. One of them when he so badly wanted the designer shirt, and Denise said that she would make it for him, and it was a complete disaster. And I wish I remember the name of the designer that he wanted. Something Jermaine Gatrell. I'll have to look it up. But at any rate, the other one being when he talked about how, when Dr. Huxtable was telling him about growing up and responsibilities and money, and he was talking about how he didn't need a lot of money because he wanted to live in a different fashion with different morals and whatever else, and they went through dollar by dollar how much it would cost him to live, and that was another classic moment. But Malcolm Jamal Warner, apparently in Costa Rica on a family vacation, has passed away after drowning at the age of 54 on a family trip. That, according to People magazine. The actor was in Costa Rica on a family vacation and drowned while swimming. A rep for Warner did not immediately respond to People's request for comment, but that is now being reported numerous places that Malcolm Jamal Warner has passed away at the age of 54. Theo Huxtable was, again, basically my age during the time that show was out, and so he was just extremely relatable, I think, in so many areas to so many different people and demographics. I know for me, there was a guy that I went to school with named Adele Means who looked exactly like Theo Huxtable. And to this day, Adele Means, every time I see him, I'm like, you were Theo Huxtable to me. But that show was so important, I think, because, and there was some level of, and I understand this now more so than I did in the time, but at that time, that show, the Cosby Show, was so relatable and so enjoyable to so many people. And the fact that you had an African-American family living in affluence in New York City and Brooklyn with doctors and attorneys and everything that goes into that at that time was a significant thing. And then I also understand the polarization for some of saying, but an African-American family can be relatable regardless of whether or not it's one of influence and affluence. And I get all of that. But and certainly Bill Cosby, we know the story there. But Malcolm Jamal Warner was very likable on that show, and I think went on to a career involving in music and production and things like that after that show was off the air. So sad news of Malcolm Jamal Warner. The WNBA All-Star Game, I made mention of this earlier. I know that the players wearing the T-shirts that said, "Pay us what you owe us," did not go over well with a lot of people. And I heard a lot of people saying, look, the WNBA, typical of the WNBA, that just when they have momentum, something like that comes along, and they've got to go out there and on the biggest stage where there probably are more eyeballs on it than ever before, you have players making that sort of a statement and how that can turn people off. And I get it. I do. But I do understand where the players are coming from. Now, we as fans, as media, we don't want to hear business talked about within sports. We don't want to be subject to the public discussion, debate, negotiations with collective bargaining and things like that. We just don't. And so when you look at the WNBA players coming out with that, we have this thought process that sports are our playground, and sports are the one thing that we, by and large, for the most part, whether you are a plumber, whether you're a mechanic, whether you're an architect, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a surgeon, whether you're a radio host, the one thing that most people have in common is that at some point in their life, they had dreams of being a professional athlete. everybody when you're a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a police officer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a football player. It's like usually one of those four things. And it doesn't take long for most to figure out that the professional athlete aspect of them, that's probably the first one that reality takes that away from you. So when you see professional athletes, then it is the natural reaction for all of us to say, you're getting paid to play a game that kids play. You're getting paid. You're living my dream. How dare you get greedy when talking about I would do anything to be able to be a quarterback. I'd do anything to be a pitcher. And so we resent when those that do that then seemingly sulk at the opportunities that are afforded them as not being good enough. But we live in a world of supply and demand. Somebody who is a plumber makes really good money because there are only so many people in his town that know how to exactly put pipes together without water leaking. Supply and demand. And if you can hit a fastball at 102 miles an hour, you can get paid for it because supply and demand, there's not many people that can do that. There are few that can do that. And the reality is, even though the numbers in the math of the salaries are astronomical compared to those professions that I just mentioned, so too, though, are the finite number of people that can do that skill set. And with the WNBA and the women of the WNBA, I totally understand the notion of this is a league that has yet to have a team, to my knowledge, at least last time I had checked, all of the franchises were still in the red. And all of the franchises were still – now, I don't believe the NBA subsidizes the WNBA at this point, but it did for a very long time, and teams still were not turning a profit. But it is very easy to say, therefore, the collective bargaining agreement and those things need to fall in line with that, except for that's all about to change. When you look at the fact that the WNBA now is getting ready to expand again, and they are bringing in, Eddie, you tell me if I'm wrong here, I'm going off memory, the teams, the cities that we've heard recently are going to now get teams. Is it Houston and Cleveland? Is that right?
Yes.
Two that have had franchises before, granted. But
Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia. They're going out to 18 teams.
Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Okay, so those three teams, it is reported, had to pay an expansion fee, entry fee of $250 million. You throw into that a new media rights partnership that is reported to pay $2.2 billion with a B, $2.2 billion. And so that means that is an additional $3 billion now that is coming into the WNBA. And so, therefore, I understand why the players – now, is the All-Star game when you have the highest number of new eyeballs on your sport tuning in, is the All-Star game the place to necessarily air that out and make your case about that new agreement? Maybe not. But at the same time, if you are wanting to draw attention that you want people to be aware of the situation, then mission accomplished, because here we are in Indianapolis talking about exactly that. You know what I mean? And so I get why that T-shirt and that message was important.
What were your thoughts on Kelsey Plum in the post-game media availability after the All-Star game, pretty much tattletelling that no members of Team Clark were present for this players' meeting Saturday morning about the shirts?
I thought it was interesting because I'm like, does that mean that – is she implying that Caitlin Clark would have had some sort of influence like that of limiting players from doing that? I get – my reaction is this. Would she have said the exact same thing?
If it was Paige Beckers or –
Correct.
You know, Tina
Correct.
Charles or somebody like that?
Correct. The Caitlin Clark thing that is fascinating to me is my message would have been to that. I understand what you're saying, but the income of which you guys are now wanting a bigger slice of the pie because the pie just got a lot bigger, what player do you think is the most responsible for that?
Yeah.
there's your. I mean, the WNBA has had fabulous players. Diana Taurasi is an amazing player. Cynthia Cooper was an amazing player. Cheryl Swoops is an amazing player. Rebecca Lobo was a very good player. You know, they've had Brittany Griner is a fabulous player, but none of them have the commercialization, polarization of a Caitlin Clark to bring in that new audience that has created that amount of money that I just mentioned. By the way, Gordon Gartrell was the mythical fashion designer that Theo Cosby wanted a $95 shirt. But sad news about Malcolm Jamal Warner. Undoubtedly my favorite song from The Who. Undoubtedly. I saw last night, J&V has walked in. I saw Bare Naked Ladies last night. Not actual Bare Naked Ladies, but the band itself. Over at the Lawn. You know, I've known like 2 or 3 of their hits, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know that I really realized, John, how just kind of overall fun.
They're fun.
And
they're Canadian, too.
talented they are,
Canadian dudes are always fun, aren't they?
Those guys, but they don't take themselves too seriously, right? And they actually did an AC/DC cover that was like, I was like, holy cow, it sounded exactly like it. But it was a fun show. It was definitely a fun show. And I called you yesterday.
Did they do The Old Apartment?
What's that?
This is where we used to live. Yeah.
They did do that, yeah. Those guys were fun, though. But you had a good weekend, right?
Let me think about it for a minute. What did I do? Well, Saturday night obviously was fun. It was, we do whatever on the JMV Takeover anyway. But when you have a whatever weekend, it's even more magnified. Those are always fun. I thought downtown was outstanding, and I feel that I can share this because I come out of downtown every single Saturday night / Sunday morning at about 1 a.m., and normally it's an absolute mess. Absolute. Everywhere, that going down one-way streets on scooters, and there's just chaos. And this was the type of weekend where it'd be nice if you would just analyze what you did and try to put that to good use. So maybe we can have some fun with it, and we just don't. It's just not allowed when people are in town that are from out of town. You know what I mean?
No, you're right.
Maybe, maybe not crap so much where we eat. That'd be great.
Right. You're right about that.
Yeah.
What's on the big show today? Joey Logano, right?
Joey Logano. What's his deal with Ross Chastain? They're fighting. Is this your average NASCAR fighting?
Yeah, guys are always fighting in NASCAR, right?
Yeah.
You going to ask him about his fighting?
I'm going to ask him about Ross Chastain and his fighting. Are you doing that Sunday?
No, I'm actually doing the Laguna Seca IndyCar race because they're on at the exact same time.
Are you going to Laguna Seca?
No. I'm doing it. We're split the crews, and I'm doing it from here.
Laguna Seca is in pole position, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Speaking of which, Eddie, do we have to qualified? Prepare qualified. Oh, that's some great driving.
Yeah, it got us all excited, though, man.
I love Laguna Seca, though. There we go. That's awesome, Eddie.
Yeah.
Monterey, California is fabulous. I love everything about it. Love everything about it.
So who does the NASCAR? Is that when they swoop in and do it themselves?
We do a split crew. So Yeoman and Michael Young will do that. Mark Janes and I will do the IndyCar side of things. And then the guys from PRN come over as well. Brad Gilly and that group.
Cookie Monsters, the Grand Marshal?
I saw that.
What's that about? Is there a sponsorship behind that we don't know about?
I don't know what that's all about.
NASCAR's trying to save PBS?
Is
that what they're doing? No, I don't know. I'm just making crap up.
That might be it. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, because Cookie Monster and Elmo, my understanding is they're looking for a place to live now, right?
Yeah. Can you talk about your shot?
Yeah. So I went in. So Premier Weight Loss, John, that you obviously have worked with, and Thomas and the group over there is great. I went in there on Friday because of the cardiovascular benefit of it.
Good for you,
just
man.
in terms of obviously it goes without saying, and I'm very fortunate in the fact that I'm just at a maintenance level. I don't need to necessarily lose weight, but in terms of the cholesterol level and the cardiovascular benefit, I went in there and talked with them and got underway and started with it. So I look forward to sharing with people, as we go along, the benefits from your heart standpoint of that as well.
Did you get in your underwear to get on the whole body thing?
No, I didn't go,
I just get right down in my underwear.
There's a dude at my gym
naked,
that does
like Vision Quest.
There's
That's
a guy
what
at my gym that I look over and I'm like, yeah, man, like this is not in the locker room. It's in the middle of the workout room.
I asked her, I said, do you mind? She goes, I'm a nurse. I go, okay. I just go full Vision Quest. I don't care.
That's good.
Right? Yeah, I want to make sure.
Well, when I get.
It's like Blue Lagoon right here.
There's nothing that drives me more crazy when you go to the doctor than when they weigh you and you're fully clothed.
Oh, with shoes and boots on and everything else.
Man, you got to take 7 pounds off that, right?
Crap, exactly. So, Malcolm Jamal Warner passed away in a drowning accident.
Costa Rica.
He was significant in the youth of Generation X.
No
was
question.
He not?
No question. I mean, that one of the great characters ever.
Yeah.
And he went on, he still did some acting, but he went on, I think he was a musical producer as well.
Didn't have Malcolm and Eddie was a show on like the CW for a while.
Forgot about that,
yeah. Malcolm and Eddie. Who was his best friend of the Cosby Show? Can you name him? His best friend was nicknamed Cockroach. Yeah. Indeed.
Okay, how about this? Who was who was the character on Different Strokes that I don't think was ever that was Arnold's nemesis. They never showed him, but you heard about him all the time. The Gooch. They never showed him,
I don't think they ever showed the Gooch. The Gooch was a bully.
That's right.
I remember when Theo, Malcolm Jamal Warner, got his ear pierced on an episode of the Cosby Show.
I do remember that.
Yeah, it kind of went for me when I got mine pierced like that too. I had to run at school. Like my basketball coach made me run.
Really?
I got my ear pierced. Yeah.
My dad. I just told the story the other day when I told my dad that I got my ear pierced, and my dad said, "Are you familiar with Vincent Van Gogh?" And I was like, "Well, I guess I got the idea of what my dad's thought process is on this."
Did you do yours at Claire's in the Bloomington Mall like I did?
I did mine. We were on spring break in Daytona when I was a senior in high school. We went to some place that was
the Ice Cube behind the needle.
Yeah, they were cashing in on kids on spring break at Daytona, right?
I did mine at Claire's Boutique at the Bloomington College
I think Claire's
Mall.
is probably the most common answer for
Claire's.
that. By the way, thanks to Pat Knight for coming on earlier and talking about Bob Hamill, speaking of Bloomington, and referring to him as Mr. Hamill for the majority of it, but great stories from Pat and Bob Knight as well.
Some of those writers, along with Bob, are so memorable because that was my newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
The Herald Telephone, then the Herald Times, but Rex Kurtz, Len Hauser.
Len Hauser, yeah, for sure.
Just some incredible names down there, too. Andy Graham, who I think is still around doing something. I don't know. But, yeah, just great names for that newspaper.
Yeah, Bob Hamill passing away at the age of 88 over the weekend, thanks to Pat Knight earlier. That will be up in podcast form. He told some great stories about Bob Knight, including Bob Knight having to hide in a tree for 20 minutes during a golf outing. All available. John's up next.
Be like Hollywood Nights right there. Let me tell you about whole something.
That's right. John's up next. We'll be back with you noon tomorrow. Thanks for listening to Quarry & Company.